My name is Vincenzo DiNicola. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist in Montreal at the University of Montreal, where I teach. And I had a program in child psychiatry, very clinically based, but I do a lot of community work and I do a lot of consulting, notably in shared care locally, and I do consulting internationally. So that's a little bit about me. The question of identity is a complex one. Um, in our talk before, you brought up the word intersectionality. I'm not sure exactly what that word means, but in a sense, I've lived at the interstices and the kind of space in between a lot of different identities. I was born in Italy, came to Canada as a child, just in time to start grade school. So I did all my schooling here in English. And then later in my life, I came to Quebec, working in English at first. I mean, because I was studying psychology in English at McGill. And then, after other turns in my life and my career, I ended up coming back here. I was recruited by the University of Montreal as a child psychiatrist and working for the first time exclusively in French. I mean, I had worked in French a little bit before.
Mhm.
I was working in French. So, there's the Italian part, there's the English Canadian part, and then the French Canadian part. And that's for starters. Professionally, my first love was philosophy. And although I really like that, and I'll tell a story about that in a moment, I was very pragmatic because I came from a kind of immigrant working class family, and I wanted to do something that would give me a career, a way of making a living, and also being practical. So I chose to go into psychology when it came to do my first formal study. So I studied psychology at McGill. I did graduate work in psychology in England at the Institute of Psychiatry. And what's interesting is that all along, my mentors were through departments of psychology, but they were psychiatrists. So, for
Okay.
example, at McGill, I did my research with a behaviorally oriented psychiatrist.
Mhm.
And it was in an accent that I chose to go to England to the Institute of Psychiatry, even though it was a graduate program in psychology. And again, I was working with psychiatrists all the time. And I had psychology mentors too. So I really lived intersectionality. My first identity was as a psychologist. I then chose to go into medicine. I did what Americans call triple boarding. I did pediatric psychiatry and child psychiatry at
Mhm.
medical school. And I think I always know I was going to do that. And because I had been in psychology, I wanted to consolidate my medical identity. So that's why I chose to do pediatrics first. And that served me really well because all of my career I've worked side by side in pediatrics. I just today I did a case of and consultation liaison of a family I knew already, but I saw this boy for the first time. And so I've been doing consultation liaison work in pediatrics, from the very beginning of my career. And I elaborated that into shared care and community care and collaborative practices. So despite the fact I do lots of different things, food and psychology, pediatrics, psychiatry, child psychiatry, community, my international work, there are certain threads that connect them all. So in my mind, there's a kind of straight linear development, but sometimes you've got to take a few little side paths to bring it all together. Follow your dream, follow what really makes you excited, or even disturbed. I mean, things that you absolutely must at any cost address because that's what motivates you. So I think if you can combine if you know where you're going, or you're searching where you're going, sometimes these little things that look like deviations actually become important ways of enriching your career. So that's really the story of what I've done. And to simplify it, I've done all my work through three lenses. It, you can wrap them up with all kinds of theories, but it really comes down to children, families, and culture. So, I trained in family therapy with a renowned family therapist in Milan. Even when I was resident here in Montreal at McGill, I would fly to Milan to get supervision every few months, and otherwise, write letters back and forth. This was before emails and all that.
Mhm.
And at the same time, my mentor at McGill was Raymond Prince, who was one of the founders of transcultural psychiatry. And he sent me this huge challenge. He said, social and transcultural psychiatry are really research branches of psychiatry. They don't really have clinical applications. At the same time, I was doing my training in family therapy. And so I decided to bring them together and created my model of cultural family therapy. So all my career, all my life, I take these different interests of mine and I create bridges, I create syntheses. So cultural family therapy was one synthesis. Child psychiatry itself is a synthesis of general psychiatry with development of children and families. The second synthesis that I was involved in was transcultural child psychiatry. So I tried to bring the kinds of questions we're asking in transcultural work into children and families. So I've been playing with those three foci or lenses, if you wish, all my career, and always enriched. Now, those are the lenses. The actual problems I worked on were trauma from the very beginning throughout. Eating and mood disorders and trauma would be the three main things that I've spent my career looking at. I did my doctoral research in psychology. I was already a psychiatrist, but I did research on, I did psychiatric epidemiology. I looked at, we did the children's food and mood study, looked at about 1,000 kids and looked at the relationship between eating and food in young kids. And so all my life, I just looked at simple thing, kids, families, culture, and different combinations, addressing trauma, addressing eating problems, addressing stress, mood disorders sometimes. So that's what I've done. So my CV looks like I'm in a lot of different places, but if I organize it differently, actually there's a really clear connecting thread. So shared care, is a very important concept all over the world. It's been very strongly developed in Canada. When I was a medical student, there was a resident in psychiatry from England, as it happened. And so, we have a lot in common because I had just arrived from England, as he had done. Nick Cates, Kates. So Nick Cates, right from his residency, was interested in the integration between primary care and specialties. And he spent his whole career doing that. And he's, until quite recently, was the chair at McMaster, my medical school. So he developed a whole career around that. And because I was always doing consultation liaison, consults to pediatrics, the idea of shared care is very important because beyond a particular consultation, what matters is how do you create relationships? How do you create easy access? So although, pediatricians, family doctors, the first line of medical care, primary care, relies on specialists, and specialists need their colleagues in primary care, and not just doctors, of course, but everybody that's involved in primary care. The communication actually is not always very good, and sometimes it's competition, sometimes people don't even talk to each other. So shared care has been a model of how do you bring these things together. So it's kind of an elaboration beyond the hospital of consultation liaison psychiatry. And the other thing that's been part of my career throughout is I've always been a community-based child and adolescent psychiatrist. So I until very recently, I was in a community clinic I had built when I first arrived here. And when I was in Ottawa, it was the same. When I was at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, it was the same. So throughout my career, I've done all the things I mentioned, and at least half of my time was always in the community. So shared care or collaborative care, collaborative practice is all to bring different layers together and different kinds of professional. So the task is helping the child and their family, and shared care collaborative practices means we come together and help each other address the task of helping the kid and his family. One of the things that helped me, that really changed my life, besides meeting Ray Prince, who was my mentor at McGill, he was not only my mentor in social and transcultural society, also at some point became the residency training director. So he had a big influence on me. At one point, I think I was about halfway through my training, was in 1985, and he invited me to a meeting of a group called, which he had been a co-founder of. I think it was founded in the late 70s, early 80s. So I was on board early on. It was called the Society for the Study of Psychiatry and Culture. So I had the chance to meet a group of really leading scholars. There were mostly American, a few Canadians, one or two people from other parts of the world, maybe Mexico, but largely it was a North American English-speaking group. And right from there, I met the people that I've been reading. So because it was a small group, I mean, there would be 40 people at the meeting. It was a kind of meeting where there weren't separate breakout rooms, and everybody listened to everybody's talk over 3 days. We met in, small places. We sort of had meals together. We went out together. We did special activities together. That had a huge impact on me because the people I'd been reading about, suddenly I met, like Ed Folks from the University of Pennsylvania at the time, who was an expert. He was a psychoanalyst, psychiatrist, um, and just so many people like that. They would do some of whom did some of the the earliest research on PTSD in the United States, on things that at the time were called culture bound syndromes, like things you see only under certain cultural conditions. So that early experience during my residency kind of really grabbed me, and I said to myself, these are the questions I need to be involved with. So that group was sort of international, Canada, United States, and sometimes you would go to other countries like England, New Zealand, I think Mexico, on one occasion. And from there, that was a launching pad to the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, to ACAP, and so on. And then from there, more international groups. So a little later, I got involved with the World Association of Social Psychiatry, and we brought the World Congress of Social Psychiatry to Canada in 1998. So quite a few years ago now, 4 years ago. And we're going to bring it back to Canada because there, in a couple of months, I'll be becoming the president of the World Association of Social Psychiatry. So really early experiences I had, it enthused me, invigorated my ideas, gave me something to work on. And so I was able to balance local work, being a community-based child psychiatrist wherever I was, whether it was in Ottawa or Kingston or here in Montreal. And I would do international consulting. First, it started with, going to international meetings. And then I actually worked in other countries. I spent some time in Haiti. Fortunately, I speak French and could sort of follow Creole, because only about 15% of the population speaks French there in Haiti. So I've consulted there, I've done some teaching there. I also did a lot of work in Brazil. I still have an important ongoing relationship with Brazil. And a newer one for me is Morocco. I've been to Morocco once, and the pandemic happened, and the rest of the time has been virtual. But very soon I'm going to be teaching a few times here in Morocco, and I'm involved in a number of initiatives there. So the international part, it just comes hand in hand with an interest in other places where things are going on. And for young people, it's a great opportunity to sort of stretch your mind and imagine how kids, families, people live in other places, what sorts of problems are confronted, especially under limited economic and socioeconomic situations, sometimes even social political limits. And for like a mid-level person and for a senior person like myself, it's really a chance to give back. And I feel like I'm learning as much as I could possibly bring. So my message always in Haiti and Brazil and Morocco has been, you don't need me to come. You need to develop your own resources. How can I help you do that? And of course, they're very polite. And they always say, so what are your recommendations? And I'm saying, well, my recommendation is do your own studies. I'll help you do them. I'll sit with you through it. And then you'll answer your own questions. And so I think that's the right approach to capacity building and to international consulting. Besides the content stuff, I think what really matters is to know what do you want to spend the rest of your life doing. I mean, if you're passionate about kids and families, we can be passionate about geriatric psychiatry or forensic psychiatry. There's many wonderful and needy and important things to do as a physician and as a psychiatrist. I think to be a child psychiatrist, you really do have to care about kids and the way kids live in any culture, in any world. So you have to care about this, to put it in a new term, intersectionality. But all my career, I've been saying that kids are at the crossroads of society. You can't think of kids and not think of families. And sometimes when the families are not there, you have to think about children's aid, children's services. You have to think about the community. You have to think about education. You have to think about the healthcare system. And so as soon as you get involved with a population that you really care about, that you try to represent, or at least try to listen to, you're very aware of the organization and delivery of healthcare, among other things, all the deliveries, from education to social services and so on. And so I think the first lesson is don't get overwhelmed by the big studies or what I've done later in my career. You know what's worth getting up in the morning and will make you feel good about yourself. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I was a student of Ross Baldessarini during medical school. I won a research scholarship to go develop a project with him this is in the late 70s, early 80s, psychopharmacogenetics. Now, if I continued with him, I would have been at the front end, the pioneering end of a very promising research career.
Mm-hmm.
And, I interviewed and, for the programs at Harvard. Then I came away, I came back, and I said to myself, I don't want to spend my life in a laboratory. I have friends that do that. I certainly admire Professor Baldessarini at Harvard enormously.
Mm-hmm.
It was the road not taken. I took another road. And when I was chief president at McGill, and we had him as a guest, we went out for dinner. And then he said, Vincenzo, I never understood why you never, accepted to come and work with me. And I said, well, I didn't know what to say. So I said, well, somebody's got to talk to the kids. Someone's got to talk to people. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate what you do, but I couldn't see myself making that contribution and being happy with it. I also am not sure I'm cut out to be that kind of researcher. So I know what my strengths were and my limits, and I made that choice. So even if someone dangles really exciting opportunities in front of you, you got to know what works for you. Now, I have a mentor in philosophy from France who asked a really interesting question. He said, what makes me a philosopher? He said, what is it that got under the skin of the flesh of existence that made me a philosopher? And he says, he was inspired by another French philosopher, Henri Bergson, who says, it's really in your youth that you confront the questions that you must at all costs answer. In other words, what is that burning thing that you absolutely have to do? And for me, besides the focus on children, the first burning thing I had to deal with, I had to respond to, was trauma. Because my first mentor, who was a psychiatrist while I was a psychologist, and I did my first research with him, which is still among the most cited things I've done on obsessive compulsive disorder and schizophrenia. It's still often cited, that study. Mm-hmm. He was a survivor of Auschwitz, and his clinic was a PTSD clinic before PTSD was invented as a concept. But of course, trauma existed anyway. And although a lot of people think it was an anxiety clinic, a lot of the people I saw were survivors of Auschwitz. Like him, he was a survivor of Auschwitz. And this blew my mind. I mean, I came from a very small little world, a very humble family in a small town. And came from a boys' Catholic high school. And I came and I discovered this. And it became that question that I absolutely had to address at all costs. I didn't know that at the time. But in retrospect, it was a question that seized me, it grabbed me. And that really is the connecting thread. And so, yeah.
Finding what you have to do is the thing to move for.
Yeah.
You've answered so many of these things. You've talked about the type of support that helped you to succeed because you had so many mentors in so many different areas, and you really just pulled them all together into these three areas: children, trauma, families, and then the shared care. So making sure that you're working with people from other specialties.
I think that's my only talent. My only talent is choosing good. My mother said I only have one talent, and it's choosing good friends.
Okay.
Loves me. She's still alive. She's 90, and she's very proud of me. She's a great education. My mother is a lovely person. She loves me, of course, and thinks I'm wonderful. But she thinks I have this one talent, and I agree with her. I have a talent of choosing really good friends, and not only that I chose great mentors, but a lot of my fellow students have gone on to great things. Like my best friend in psychology at McGill was Stephen Pinker. Steve Pinker is the world's most famous psychologist at Harvard. And, we're still in touch, and we do very different things, but it's very inspiring. And I can repeat that across. So I have this one talent to choose people that can teach me something that I can model, that I can imitate, and try to be a better person, a better psychologist, a better psychiatrist. learn to be a better therapist. And I think if you continue to do that, you'll always be young and you'll always be going. I'm 69. I still have mentors. I can name them. One of my great mentors is Bart Blinder, who's a child psychiatrist and child analyst at the University of California, Irvine. And just yesterday, I had 2 or 3 email exchanges with him. He's constantly sending me materials to share with my students, with my residents, with my colleagues, with my staff. But really, I'm the one that's taking advantage. And so I'm at 69. I still have mentors. People are still taking care of me, and that is my great talent. It's like that's my superpower. We're talking about superheroes before. My superpower is choosing really fine people that can make me better at whatever I'm doing, whether it's therapy or the child psychiatry or whatever. Yeah, sure. I think part of the challenge is knowing what your limits are and not stretching beyond that. Everybody that does this work will eventually confront limits in terms of, you know, the limits of the research, and there are often sort of philosophical and real life limits. Like I've been very involved with global mental health movement. So I'm sort of like half a generation later. Like the pioneers are just a bit older than me, maybe 10, 15 years older. But I got in really early, and I contributed to Elliot Sorrell's book in 2012, which I think was the first book that had global mental health in the title. So I'm about kind of half the step after the pioneering generation. Now, and we co-founded at the APA the Global Mental Health Caucus, which I'm very involved with since. At the same time, there's a lot of criticism of global mental health. Like all of the populational or global approaches, as my friend, past chair at GWU says, James Griffith, where he calls Griff says that, epidemiology, public health, maybe even global health kind of cruise at 35,000 feet. And we need that. We need that overview. But we got to bring it down to the ground level. What I call it going from the population to the patients. And I think the real challenge ahead of me as, incoming president of the World Association of Social Psychiatry is to translate the very powerful social determinants of health and mental health into the ground level. And what does that really mean for a clinic? You're setting up a clinic, you're setting up a research project, you're advocating, you're policy making, whatever you're teaching, whatever you're doing, those 4 levels. How do you translate the powerful issues of global mental health locally? So with that kind of overview, how do you go into another country and be sure that you're not just imposing? There's an American journalist called Ethan Waters who wrote a book called Crazy Like Us, which is critical about how the West, powerful countries like the United States, Canada to some extent, we kind of export our ideas about mental health around the world. That's why he calls it Crazy Like Us. Well, we're very sensitive to that. I don't want to go to Haiti or Bulgaria or, Morocco and tell them how to imagine human suffering as much as possible. And we're all limited. We should go there, use whatever we have as tools and training, and listen to them and try to help capture the voices of the people there, the individuals, the communities, the culture, the society, and do our best. And everybody wants to do that. But are we doing well? That's the question. So that's a big challenge. And at a more micro level, a big challenge is, are you going in and offering a service and then leaving a gap? So I had some fun in my meet at another university I was at, not a lot, some tens of thousands of dollars. And I was looking at a project in Rio de Janeiro to see if we could set something up. And they were very acutely aware of international folks coming in with mining, with projects. They would do the project and would walk away. So I'm very worried about going in, creating, either creating or identifying a need, responding to it in the short run, and then walking away. So just to give you a small example, and this is not value premium. I'm not saying I'm better, but in my small way, what I do when I do consultations in Brazil, for example, as a family therapist, I'll do a workshop. I get well paid for it. We have fun touring. I always ask for trainees to be there, and I always ask them for the consultation that it's someone that's followed, and I ask them to follow the family for a year, free or a very small symbolic amount. For example, I was in Salvador Bahia, which is like going to in Brazil. It's like going north, it's like going south. It's like going to Mississippi. Like 80% of the people, are African descendants, and the family that came paid $1 like 30 cents for the consultation. It costs more for the clinic to being done by taxi than the 30 cents they paid, the $1 they paid. But what I asked them to do was make the therapist that brought them in, using me as a consultant, promised they would follow the families for a year. So in a small way, we could try to not have a footprint in other places that undermines the local people. And another kind of algorithm or kind of heuristic you can use about that is you don't come in and try to be a hero and try to show off what you know. You try to shore up the local resources. So if the local resource has one clinic, or if they only have hammers, you don't offer screwdrivers and Phillips drives and things like that. So you try to shore up their resources, expand them a little bit, but in light of what they can do or they can deliver, not come in and show off. But this happens even here in North America. Famous people come in. It's not as true anymore, but people used to come in, whether it's in psychoanalysis or other forms of therapy, it's family therapy, and they would do a big show in front of a lot of other people in a way that it's not a reality. I mean, you couldn't imitate that, and it's not clear that does any good. So I learned a lot of lessons from watching and making my own mistakes. Try to be more humble, bring in one or two ideas that are adapted and responsive to local things. And an example of the problems of doing that is that the local people that have access, that bring you in, often asking for favors. Like I'm at a hotel in Morocco, and someone wants to have lunch with me to talk about a family member. Now, I came into the profession because I care about people, so I listen. But I say to them, listen, I'm not licensed in this country. I will be here for you. Here's a really trusted colleague here. Why don't you consult with them? This person understands your language, understands your culture. You'd be better served by this person. And I feel very limited ethically and practically in terms of what I can offer. So so sometimes when you're like the visiting fireman, as we used to say, demisexual language, it's very appealing to think you're bringing in something special. I said to them, I don't think I could do better than my friend here, Hashem Tial. I mean, he has a private clinic. He's a wonderful guy. Then we know Tial, but we want to know what you think. I said, well, what I think is you should consult him because he's really competent. He's really great. I don't think you would do better in North America than this guy. So shoring up resources. Do not go in there and get seduced by being the flavor of the week, and don't oversell what you know, and don't ignore the local resources, because that's what they have to deal with. That's as true in Montreal or Philadelphia as it is in Morocco or Sofia, Bulgaria. I really believe what I'm saying.
So that being humble is a huge part of what you're doing when you're going and doing that consulting, by bringing in, helping them recognize the importance of the people that are there that they may not have appreciated before.
Let me speak to that, because I've given this some thought. Whether humility is a personal quality of the person, of the physician. Well, there are people who are arrogant as people, but actually as physicians, as therapists, become very, very they become very other and service oriented. So, we have among us, a psychiatrist that won the Nobel Prize, Eric Kandel. But when Professor Kandel is in front of a patient, the task is the same for him as it is for, a humble country doctor or, an R1 or anybody else. I mean, the task is what makes you humble, beyond and above and beside your own personal qualities. So I find that really refreshing. I mean, every new consultation, doesn't matter what I've accomplished before. It doesn't matter, I got this wonderful prize from ACAP on culture and diversity, the Gene Spurlock Award. Patients don't know that. They don't care, by the way. I mean, my mother cares, my kids care. Sometimes I care. That patients don't care. It doesn't add anything to them. They care about what your capacity to listen and help them on their journey, looking for solutions to whatever they're looking to solve. And I think the task as a physician makes you humble, above and beyond your own personality. And that, I think, is one of the saving graces of being a doctor, a healer, if you wish, if we can call ourselves that. Again, I came from these very humble roots. My mother, as I said, has a grade 3 education. My grandmother was illiterate. And at a certain point, yeah, there wasn't a book in my house. I remember a book, maybe some magazines, Italian, but there was nothing. And so my grandmother, who was illiterate and didn't speak English, encouraged me to read during the summer. Now, you're 6 years old, you're 7 years old, you want to go out and play, right? She would say, you have to read to me. And I said, but how will you know, grandmother? I asked her, and it's fine if I read. She says, you'll read out loud to me. And I said, but how will you know? Because you don't understand English, then you'll translate for me. And I said, well, how much as well? You'll read me 10 pages every morning. You'll read it in English. Then you translate for me in Italian what you've understood. And so that was my illiterate grandmother encouraging me to become a reader. So later, my mother was a housekeeper for professors at the university. And as it happened, she was a housekeeper for two kinds of professors in psychiatry and philosophy. And she would talk about me, and she'd, I had a smart little boy, and they would drive her home. And then one day, Professor Eisenstadt, a philosopher, said, he came in and he said, your mother tells me that you're a big reader. What are you reading? And as it happened, I was reading Freud's interpretation of dreams. So we sat for 2 hours and talked about Freud's interpretation of dreams. He'd read it and he asked me which dream impressed me the most. Then he gave me some details about Freud's life and so on. So later I became a psychiatrist, obviously. And I also, you may not know, just 10 years ago, I completed my doctorate in philosophy. So my mother's work as a kind of happy accident in life connected me to the two things that I do. So I now consider myself a late career psychiatrist and an early career philosopher.
Wow.
So that's a kind of accident based on my humble roots. But if you're true to who you are, not try to be something you're not, just say really close to who you are, really, lots of doors can open. So that's one of the lessons I learned. And I don't have very part, and it's not reverse snobbery. I have nothing against people who are like my children are lucky to be in, look, I've got 5,000 books in this house. I'm not against that. You have to use what you've got. Hillary Clinton said one thing I really love. She says, bloom where you're planted. I love that.
Wow.
Bloom where you're planted. You're planted, in a housing project. There's violence or there's limitations around you. Be your best. And I think that's the best lesson I can offer people. In every environment you're in, do your very best. Like you, Dr. Mazzini, I've read lots of CVs, on committees, for medical students, residents, prizes, everything, hiring people. One of the things that strike me about the most interesting CVs and some of the most talented and dedicated people is someone would want to come into psychiatry and they'd won. I remember Isaac Marks, who was one of my mentors in London, had won prizes in surgery. That's what Hillary Clinton means. Bloom where you're planted. You want to be a psychiatrist, but you're doing a rotation in surgery. Do the best you can do in surgery. An orthopedic surgeon, but you're stuck in child psychiatry with Dr. DiNicola. Do the best you can with Dr. DiNicola. That's what I think it means, bloom where you're planted. Get the best out of every day, because you never know when you're going to need it. I tell my students all the time, look, listen up, because you're going to see this in your practice, no matter what you're doing. From orthopedics to pathology, you're going to see what we're talking about here in this clinic. I believe that. And I think the idea of getting the best out of every environment is, I think, the road to happiness. I mean, otherwise you're always waiting for the right thing to come along.
And
it comes.
That's wonderful. I think that's an excellent place for us to end. I think you have been inspirational for whomever is watching these videos. And I thank you again for taking your time in order for us to provide this program.
It's a real pleasure. And I've been involved with this mentoring project, I think since 2017, and I've been there a couple of other times. Hope to make it again this year in person. But I think this is really, really important to offer ideas, inspiring, life experiences, and to pass the baton on to the next generation. I'm at the generativity point in my career. I'm a big believer in the next group that's going to carry it on. So I hope that people can draw one or two lessons from this. And I'm available if anybody wants to talk.